Welcome back to another episode of the podcast series, The Leader Within. Today, I get to introduce special guest Kerry-Ann. She is a Chief Marketing Officer at the JMMB Financial Group, which has operations across the Caribbean and headquarters in Kingston, Jamaica, where she's currently based. Kerry-Ann is also the producer and host of the Internal Marketing Podcast, a personal project where she supports the business leadership community by hosting discussions with various subject matter experts in internal marketing and employee advocacy. Specifically, her aim is to flip the marketing conversation on how companies can market internally to their employees with a view to ultimately engage and empower them to become advocates of the company brand. Welcome, Kerry-Ann. So how did you discover this passion/niche?
Hi, Angela. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to have this conversation. Wow, that question is a great question. And I want to say that it was part deliberate and part accidental, right? Of course, I've been in marketing for over 20 years, and I'd reached a stage closer to the 20-year mark where I said, there had to be more than just being a marketer in a company. I felt like there's more that I could do to kind of give back to the business and marketing community in particular. And I just started to look across my journey and realized that one of the things that marketers struggle with is how do we prove value? How do we prove the value that we bring to an organization? Marketing is one of those functions that's not highly valued. Everybody's a marketer. That's a term that we use often. And my thought was, how do we identify a way that marketers can prove the value that we bring and broaden our engagement of people that we work with across the company? And through some digging and talking to folks in different functions across different companies, I stumbled upon the nomenclature internal marketing, right? Which really, as you would have defined in the introduction, it's the process of marketing to your employees with a view to engaging them in the brand, creating that emotional connection in the brand so that they're motivated and ultimately empowered to be great ambassadors of the brand. Because ultimately, if your employees aren't excited about the company that they work with or the products that they sell or even the customers that they serve, then how can we expect our customers to get excited? And I realized it just wasn't a conversation that enough folks were having in the marketing industry or across the business community in general. And then I started to search for podcasts and didn't find an internal marketing podcast or dedicated podcast either. And I said, hey, maybe this is my calling ish to kind of jump in and do my own podcast where the goal would be to engage different subject matter experts to talk about the different facets of internal marketing and employee brand advocacy. And it's been a wonderful journey. It's a hard one. I'm a solo podcaster, so I produce and host, but it's really been a great opportunity to meet so many great people and carry the conversation to, at last check, is well over 18 countries across the world.
Huge congrats for expanding your reach like that and filling the gap for the business community from that perspective.
Thank you.
And speaking of your journey, who are some key leaders or mentors who have influenced your journey along the way? And like what kind of characteristics or attributes that they have and that played a role in your success ultimately?
Wow. Well, there are a few. I can share perhaps the first one that comes to mind for me as I call virtual mentor, because probably if I call his name right now, he may not even know that he's my mentor or has been. That's Paul C. Brunson. So Paul C. Brunson, he is American, but Jamaican parentage. And right now he's living in the UK with his beautiful family. He's an entrepreneur, a television presenter, among other things. And I met him through a project that we had asked him to come on board with for JMMB. That's a company I worked for. And through him, I realized the importance of building your personal brand in a way that positions you for whatever success that it is you want to achieve in life. And it's just been so wonderful, not only meeting him and getting to know him and learn his path, but also to learn more about myself to learn a whole new skill set about how to establish a platform, become a thought leader, build your personal brand, but also to find my voice, because that's something that I struggled with for quite some time. Imposter syndrome even still continues to be a little bit of a thing for me, but it took me a long time to think that I could produce content and post on a platform like LinkedIn, much less have my own podcast. And through him, I learned that he said, Kerry-Ann, you don't need to have 30 years or 50 years of experience before you can become a thought leader, or before you can start generating content that's going to add value to somebody else. He said, use your voice, find the courage. Wherever you are, wherever you were yesterday, someone else is there today. So whatever you learned yesterday, you can turn around and help them because they're there today. And all you are is one day ahead of them. You're one step ahead. But the beauty is you would have lived that experience. You would have learned from that experience. And here's your opportunity to turn around and help them. So no matter how small you think your experience is, or how unimportant you think you may be in this vast, big, bold, beautiful world, at the end of the day, there's always one person that can benefit from your experience and your lessons learned. So be bold and use your voice. And for that, I'm grateful. And he's been a great influencer and an impact. He's had a great impact on my life ever since.
I appreciate that reminder from Paul, and both yourself as well, because I remember as I was starting my podcast too, the same thing was like, who am I to speak or ask questions about this? And then one of my trusted advisors in my network, he's like, like there's always going to be a leader who doesn't know what you know right now. And then there's going to be someone who, like similar to what you said, is just starting their journey and would value you being able to take information, dissect it down, and then be able to answer some of the questions that maybe didn't even come to their head, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know for you, one of the things that you're most passionate about, that you're building your thought leadership around, is internal marketing and employee advocacy, which we kind of mentioned on a little bit about earlier. So what are maybe 1 to 3 things that you're noticing that you're like, hey, if I could offer you guys these tips, this is what I would take into consideration when building this out?
And for internal marketing specifically, right?
Yeah. Internal marketing specifically.
So the first thing is, I think companies need to understand their employee base a little bit better when it comes to the level of engagement that they have or don't have in the brand. Right. So normally I think a lot of forward thinking companies, or even just present day companies, whether they're forward thinking or not, they would probably do something along the lines of your typical employee satisfaction and engagement survey. Are they happy with working there? Do they think the benefits are great? Do they like their team leader, etc.? And all of that's very, very important. And we got to keep doing that. But not very many companies are digging into how much does the employee base engage in the company brand? Are they proud to work for the brand that they work for? Do they understand what makes your products or services better than the competition? If someone were to come up to them and say, hey, I want to do business with the company that you work for, why should I choose you over someone else? How many of your employees could confidently answer that question? How many of your employees are emotionally connected to the brand or the company that they work for? Those are the things that companies need to find out very, very quickly, because what it means is that if you have a low level of engagement in that regard, then it means that your employees can't be your biggest advocates. And when you think about your customers, everything right now, whether it's marketing or just business relationships in general, everything is human to human. Customers would faster believe the word of your employees than they would believe the great things you say about yourself through your official marketing channels, right? So the first thing you got to do is determine if your employees are engaged in the brand or not. Do they understand your value proposition? Are they connected to the brand in that way? Having found that out, the next thing is, what do you need to fix? In the 4 P's of marketing: place, price, product, promotion. In the case of product, for internal marketing, product is the culture. It's the job. Are your employees happy with the job? Do they like the culture that they're working in? Do they like their boss? All of those things that you typically want to dig into. Do they understand the brand story? Do they connect with the brand story, the brand values? Because if you want them to promote your product, which is your company brand, then the product has to be great. So if there's anything that needs to be fixed where the culture and the job is concerned, then address those. And then the third thing is to whatever, replicate whatever marketing strategy you're doing to customers and prospective customers outside. Replicate that and do that with your employees. So what are some of the things you can do to creatively speak to your employee base, engage them, and get them connected to the brand? So yes, you have your traditional internal communications activities, your e-newsletters, but start thinking about things like internal podcasts and live stream webinars and virtual or in-person events that are really at the heart of getting your employees connected. If there's any education or information or sensitization sessions that you need to have with your team so they know what's great about the brand, what's great about your products and services, especially relative to the competition, start doing those things. And of course, empower them to use their voices, help them to know how to show up on a platform like LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever your target audience is, so that they feel that sense of empowerment and enablement to be able to use their voices, not only to their benefit, but of course the company brand gets to go along for the ride. So those are the three things that I would recommend they do.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really big thing that you highlighted multiple ways of approaching it, right? Because if
Yeah.
you simply go with a newsletter each month, I don't know about you, but sometimes you just skim over emails because it's TLDR, right? Too long didn't read, for those who
Yeah.
didn't know what the acronym meant, right? Or just receive so many that you're like, how do I know what is actually important, especially when there's just way too much information? So I guess based on your experience, have you found that one method works more effectively than another, or is it difficult to say because each company dynamic is so different?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, first and foremost, you're right. Every company dynamic is different. So, you're going to have to, just like you would in your regular external marketing strategy, who is your audience? So, look at your employee base, look at them demographically. If you have a lot of Gen Zs making up the majority of that base, then how you engage them is different than how you would have engaged probably a lot of the Gen Xers or even millennials these days. So, make sure that you understand your audience, understand their psychographics, what makes them tick, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, and then, of course, again, use the initiatives that are going to work for them. So, yes, it really is about your company makeup, your employee base description. But I would say also don't be afraid to think outside of the box. I know COVID has forced us to do that, especially know that for a number of companies, we're either remote work or hybrid. How you engage in hybrid is very different than how you would engage in face to face. So I know in my company, we've done things like live streams. So, like on a Thursday evening, JMMB Live, we're streaming from head office right across the over our Slack platforms, Microsoft Teams, and it's a great opportunity to talk about things like health and wellness or work-life balance, things like that that are speaking to the needs of employees, not just, okay, this is the latest development, this is how much profit we made last quarter. And I mean, those are important, don't get me wrong. But if you're speaking to your target audience, you have to look at them holistically and position yourself as a company that cares about them in as much as you care about your own bottom line. And so, yeah, do what works for your organization and don't be afraid to think outside of the box.
I find that no matter what initiative it is, sometimes it's actually difficult to create buy-in from everyone up top, right? Or
Yeah.
the key influencers that you actually need on board to make something happen, right? So for you, what have you learned that actually creates a business case where it's like, hey, like you guys need to be on board. If not, then blank, right? So yeah, I'm curious as to what skill you've developed in the process.
Wow. Well, the skill set really has to do with, well, first of all, I'll be honest and say, and I said it up front too, was about how am I using my voice to build my own internal reputation, which is technically not internal marketing, but because you're speaking to an internal audience, it's so very important for you to recognize how am I leveraging my relationships across the business, especially up to the C suite. And yes, I'm part of the C suite, but recognizing that even within the C-suite, you have so many different divergent personalities and expectations that you're going to have to fulfill and just languages that you're going to have to speak. And so for me, it's recognizing how do you get better and measuring impact, right? And I know, especially for those marketers listening, that's a really huge deal about how do you measure the impact of what you do. But I think for any functional leader in an organization, whether especially if you're in sales or even in HR, how do you connect the dots between the outcome of what you do, not just the output, but the outcome of what you do, and connecting the dots to the overall objective that the CEO and the CFO have in mind, which ultimately drives back to things like profitability and revenue. And even if you don't have a direct line to revenue and profitability, because I'm listening to probably my HR team who may say, well, I don't really know how to do that. The question is, look at what you do and how does that possibly impact bottom line. So if you want to look at things like in the case of internal marketing, looking at things like, are your high performers leaving or are they staying? In as much as you may not be able to convert that directly to bottom line impact, you can perhaps find a circuitous way to show how that impacts productivity, right? When you have your top performers leaving, that's not something I don't think any CEO or CFO wants. Are you attracting great talent? Do you find that team members are engaged? Do you find that team members feel proud to refer friends and family to come and work for the company? Or are they proud to refer us as a brand for consumers to buy from us, or even other businesses if you're in the B2B space? So those are the things I think people can start to look at and say, hey, for what we do, how does what we do impact the bottom line? And how can we devise the key performance indicators, the metrics that can show the C-suite, especially the CEO and the CFO, the impact that we're having on the bottom line of the organization?
And I can definitely appreciate that, especially when companies cut budgets, right? And they're trying to
Mhm.
understand, like, okay, we have less resources, potentially the same amount of work. We need to get crystal clear on what is a priority. Those KPIs make a huge difference, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And so I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. It still ties
Sure.
into my question, but you recently wrapped up season 3 of your podcast, the Internal
Mhm.
Marketing Podcast. What are some key insights that you've gained in that season that ties into what you're doing today?
Well, I'd say the number one thing I learned is the importance of networking and relationship building. So my podcast, it's not solo in the sense that it's not just me talking to microphone. I'm actually the host, and for every episode that I've done so far, I invite a featured guest who is a subject matter expert in a particular area of internal marketing or employee brand advocacy. So it's a great opportunity for me to meet and speak to people just like how we're doing now, Angela, from right across the world. So I've interviewed guests in New Zealand, Australia, in Eastern Europe. It's just been a wonderful opportunity to meet so many people, and you recognize that it's not just about coming online and having the conversation like a tradition, like a typical Zoom call, and then okay, thank you very much, and you close out and you head on your way. It's how am I going to give value to this person who I have in front of me across the screen, because it's all virtual now with these interviews, but also how can I extract value? What's the mutual benefit that we can generate together as people whose paths have crossed on a journey that can be very, very mutually beneficial? And I think that when you're talking about as someone growing in the business space, you want to climb up the career ladder, or even if you have a place that you'd like to go and you see yourself in another 2, 3, 5 years, it's people that's going to help you get there, and how you leverage those relationships. And not, of course, it's not a one-way street, it's two-way, but how are you leveraging those relationships has been a huge lesson that I've learned on my podcasting journey. And the second thing is just recognizing that the skills that I learn here are transferable to another sphere of life. So having been a podcaster, I know things like about what microphone to use, the camera, the platforms, how to produce a podcast. I've been able to transfer those skill sets to organizations where I volunteer my time. So, like, I'm a member of my high school alumni association. And during COVID and right after COVID, when people were still trying to figure stuff out, and the question was, well, how can we engage the current student population as alumni to share nuggets that we would have learned on our journey? We started this live stream, kind of like a podcast where we do a live stream, we record it and upload it on our YouTube channel for folks, students to watch on demand. And it's a skill set that I have that I can just use and transfer. And people are so grateful when you can take a skill set and transfer it. Again, it's gratis, it's free of cost, right? Free of charge, obviously, because it's a volunteer effort. but just recognizing that your new skill sets are not just something you can leverage in your career and your job, but it's something that you can give to some other area of benefit that people can really thrive in. And it's just been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be able to do that.
Thank you for sharing your learnings. And I just got to pause right there about the transferable skills because as I go on this journey, I have so much appreciation for content creators because the amount of planning that goes into
Mhm.
producing an episode, the SEO side of post production, the video editing, understanding what platforms and workflows work best, the networking aspect, and building those mutually beneficial relationships. Because you're not just giving a call out to anyone and anyone on the sun, you're being very intentional with it,
Yes.
right? So I think it's pretty incredible what you're doing, but I'm a little bit
Thank
biased there.
you. Thank you.
And I totally agree with you about how relationships will get you really far. And I know that leaders, especially great leaders, play a key role in transforming someone's success journey. So
Mhm.
from your progression, you went from senior manager to assistant vice president to now CMO. How do you approach building and managing a high performing team?
So, that's a great question. And I've managed so many teams over the years, and some things I've gotten right, and some things I didn't get so right along my many year journey. But I'd say for me, the first thing is knowing how to hire the right people, right? So the first thing is recognizing that everybody has their areas of strength, and that's perfectly okay that we all don't have the same strengths. And so when I'm looking at building out a team as part of the hiring process, I rely heavily on assessment tools that give me insight into someone's personality, how they work, the role that they could potentially play on a team, and what type of team leader they work best with. And I use that information to help me to know, well, will this person be a right fit for the team? Because that's very, very important. Because again, if everybody looks the same, sounds the same, then we won't get very far. So the first thing is knowing how to hire the right people. The second thing is that as far as building a team is recognizing how to adapt to different communication styles. So there are some team members that I have who are probably a little bit more comfortable with just, forming, maybe having more relaxed conversation, interpersonal engagement. And there's some people who are just, look, I just really am about the work, just tell me what I need to do, just show me respect and I'm good. And I've learned that I've had to learn how to dance through the raindrops to know how to communicate to different people. And that's perfectly okay. Again, at the end of the day, beauty is in the diversity of the team. And so once I'm hiring the right people that fit and I know how to adjust my communication, that's also very, very important. But I think the number one thing, if I were to rank them, is learning how to create a sense of safety among my team. And I always tell team leaders, your team needs to feel safe with you. And what do I mean by safe? Is that they have to trust your intentions towards them. They have to know that as their team leader, I have their best interest at heart. It doesn't mean that I may not have to make tough decisions sometimes, or maybe I have to give constructive criticism from time to time and maybe correction to show them, well, this is how you could have done something better or differently. But ultimately, if they know that how they've interacted me shows that as a leader, I have their best interests at heart because I want them to be the best that they can be. I want them to achieve their goals, and they're treated with a sense of fairness, then they feel safe with me. And they know that no matter what happens, they know that it was done in their best interest to the best of my ability. So those are the things I would say are the key ingredients in building great teams.
Thank you for sharing that. And would you say that you use the same skill set in managing relationships laterally and upwards? Like, for example, the CEO or CFO? Because I noticed that those dynamics, you have to be very, very careful because sometimes it's higher stakes, right? So would love to hear your perspective on that.
Absolutely. I think to a certain extent they're the same, but they're slightly different nuances. So when I talk about safety, I think everybody needs to feel safe with you. My CEO needs to feel safe with me, but the sense of safety that he would have to feel is more along the lines that he knows he can trust me to get the job done, to support him in achieving the common goals that we've set for the organization. And he knows that I'm going to play the requisite role to get it done, right? So he doesn't have for 1 minute to doubt my commitment to the organization or my commitment to the job. So that is what safety is for him. Whereas laterally, safety is more along the lines of, well, as a partner on the team, do they trust again that I have the team's best interest at heart? I'm not just there looking out for myself, trying to get all the kudos. Can they trust that I'm there for the benefit of the wider team, which includes individual benefits across the lateral team as well? Communication, of course, will always be something that works. And again, communicating across or up. Those techniques, you got to learn what's important. How do you communicate to your boss? Different from how you communicate to someone who's lateral, because I have had bosses where they don't care if you ask them about how are the kids, how is the families. They're just like, okay, it's about the work. And there's some bosses I've had who love to talk about the kids and the family, and you spend easily the first 10 minutes of every meeting catching up on how are the kids and how are the family. Again, it's about building relationships and making sure that you're communicating to the people in the way that makes those relationships thrive.
And when it comes to leadership in itself, I know growing up, it was almost glorified to climb the corporate ladder, go as high as you can, just because of a level of reputation that comes with being, whether it's C-suite, senior manager, VP, etc. But on the flip side of it, I would like to ask you to fill in the blank for the following, especially because leaders have such a big role in people's lives and it's not just about the title. That's why I'm going to ask this one.
Sure.
So if you could fill in this blank, you should not be a leader if, what would that blank be?
You should not be a leader if you don't truly care about people, because leading inherently means that you're leading people. And in as much as these people are hired to do a job and you pay them a salary to get something done, and you could argue that, well, I'm paying them, aren't I? They should just get it done. Ultimately, these people have lives. They are somebody's partner, somebody's wife, husband, mother, grandmother, grandchild. Everything that happens outside of the 8 or 10 or however many hours you engage them in the job, there's a whole other life that's impacting them. And if you don't understand their dynamic as individuals, what makes them tick, what may be impacting them externally, so that internally it's showing up in how they work, then leadership is not for you. If you're just about widgets, then probably find a job that allows you to focus on widgets. But if you're going to lead people, you have to inherently care about people and have their best interests ultimately at heart. So that's how I would fill in those blanks right there.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. And that's why I really appreciate that human-centric leadership approach, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. What happens inside of work and outside of work, it all intertwines with one another, right?
That's right.
And as we slowly wrap up our conversation, my question for you is, when you think of the whole concept of unleashing an individual or an organization's potential, what do you think is maybe one of the key things that will help with that?
Well, you're speaking to the internal marketer, right? So I'm going to say that it comes down to its people. The reality is that products can be copied. I can create something today and someone else can come next week and create a bigger, better, sexier model, right? Or I can perhaps create an awesome brand and then somebody comes and with a big marketing budget in another brand and throws a lot of resources behind it and makes it a bigger, better brand. But having great people, being able to retain great people, great talent, being able to attract great people, great talent with an awesome culture, being able to engage your people, being able to motivate them, inspire them, empower them. That is an asset that's very difficult to replicate. And so for any organization that has a big, hairy, audacious goal, start with your people, because your people are going to be your greatest asset that you can leverage to any kind of success you want to achieve as a company.
And I appreciate the reminder of that, because as the HR person, I know how expensive it can be when you're not focused on retaining amazing talent, right? Because to retrain and try to quote unquote sell your brand or whatever it may be all over again, it costs so much more than when you already have an engaged and excited workforce to back your brand up, right?
Yes, indeed. I knew you would agree with that as the HR person.
Definitely appreciate everything you've said so far. And I guess my final question for you is, what is one thing that you're working on right now that you're super excited about?
So, the one thing I'm working on right now that I'm super excited about, and I'm saying it hesitantly because I'm not as far along in the process as I'd like to be, but it's a book. It's a book. I want to write my first book. I've started the process in terms of having the preliminary conversations about how to go about it in the best way possible. But I'm super excited about it. And hopefully, by the end of this year, I can have a date by when I can say to folks, hey, it's coming out in 2024 early. This is the date. And I'm super excited.
Well, good luck with that process. I can't wait to see what this book is going to be about. Maybe internal marketing, maybe about you, since you have such a
Well,
successful
yeah, it's going to be more on the internal marketing side, I'll be honest with you. But, when I look across the landscape, I just felt like there are not very many books written on internal marketing. And for those that I see that are written, they're largely academically focused, written more so for like colleges and universities, which is great that they're teaching all of that. But the practical application of internal marketing in business, I think there's still a lot of opportunity to get more of that kind of content out there. So hopefully I'll be able to throw my hat in the ring and get that done sooner rather than later.
Well, I can't wait to see it because I believe that HR doesn't always come with that skill. I don't ever
Mhm.
recall one point in time which I learned that in school, to be quite honest. It wasn't until I bootstrapped startups and I'm like, oh my gosh, like internal marketing is just as important as external marketing because how your people inadvertently and unconsciously sell your company impacts your success, right? So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how you write that piece of content so it's digestible for individuals like myself. So
Thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely keep you posted on that.
for sure. Well, thank you so much again, Kerry-Ann, for sharing your expertise and your experience. And to everyone else who's taken the time to tune into another episode, thank you so much for your time and your attention. It means so much. And I can't wait for you to join me on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.